Hey guys, tonight we begin with something quietly fascinating, something that shapes every part of our lives, even though we rarely think about it. We're going to drift into the distant past where the idea of debt first appeared. Long before banks, long before nations, long before any of the systems we rely on today. It might sound like a heavy topic, but I promise, the way we explore it tonight will be soft, slow, and relaxing. Before we sink into this gentle journey, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you want, let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you right now. It always amazes me to see people drifting in from all around the world. Now, before we begin, I want you to settle down wherever you are. If you're watching on your phone, or your laptop, or even your TV, go ahead and place your device to the side. Let it rest. Let yourself rest. You don't need to look at the screen anymore. Close your eyes gently, like you're inviting sleep to sit beside you. You don't have to force anything. Just let your eyelids fall naturally. Take a breath in, slow and easy, and let it out even slower. Let your shoulders soften. Let your hands loosen. Let the day begin to melt away. Tonight, I'm going to take you on a quiet walk through time. We're going to wander through ancient markets, old temples, forgotten villages, and the quiet corners of early civilizations. We'll explore how humans first created debt, how simple promises turned into entire systems, and how those systems still echo in the world we live in today. And don't worry about staying awake through all of it. This story is meant to carry you gently, like a soft tide. So if you drift off, that's perfectly fine. Let my voice guide you as we ease into tonight's slow and peaceful journey. Whenever you're ready, let your breathing settle. Close your eyes if you haven't already, and let's begin. Chapter 1. The first promise ever owed. Take another soft breath in, and let it slip out slowly. Let your body settle as we drift together into the very beginning of human exchange. Not the beginning of money, not the beginning of markets, but the beginning of something much simpler. The beginning of a promise. Imagine yourself thousands and thousands of years ago, long before cities, long before kingdoms, long before anyone even imagined writing on a piece of clay. The world was quieter then. Nights were darker. Days were ruled by the rhythm of nature rather than clocks or schedules. People lived in small groups, almost like extended families, and instead of coins or paper bills, the only currency that mattered was trust. Picture a small campfire glowing against the evening sky. The flames are steady, soft, and warm. You can hear the low crackle of wood breaking down into embers. Around this fire sits a tiny community. They share food, they share shelter, they share danger, they share comfort, and most of all, they share responsibility for one another. This is where the first type of debt appeared, even though nobody called it that. Nobody had a word for it. Nobody even thought of it as something to keep track of. It wasn't a burden or an obligation or a system. It was simply kindness flowing back and forth. Imagine one person returning from a day of gathering berries, bringing more than they personally need. Maybe they hand a small pile to a friend who found nothing that day, not because they expect repayment, but because survival depended on helping one another. Later, maybe days or weeks later, the friend would find something else and share it back, not because they owed anything, but because giving was part of the relationship. There were no rules, no numbers, no contracts, just a soft understanding that if you help someone today, they will help you tomorrow. This gentle rhythm created the first version of what we now call debt, though it was closer to care, closer to connection, closer to a shared promise. Now imagine the sounds of that ancient world settling around you. The wind brushing through tall grasses, the distant call of animals moving through the night, people quietly preparing to sleep. These early humans didn't have banks or ledgers, but they carried a simple truth. Nobody survives alone. And so, every act of giving strengthened a bond. Debt, in this original form, wasn't heavy at all. It wasn't stressful or frightening. It was more like passing a small flame from one torch to another, keeping the circle warm. When someone shared a tool or gave a warm piece of clothing made from animal hide, it wasn't traded for something equal in value. It was simply offered, because everyone understood that life was easier when they supported each other. You can imagine how natural it felt. If someone spent extra time shaping a spear for a friend, the friend might later share a larger cut of meat from a successful hunt. If one person helped repair another's shelter before a storm, that kindness would echo back in some other form later. Nothing was written down. Nothing was measured. The entire system was based on memory, on gratitude, on trust. Slow down your breath here for a moment. Let it move gently in and out, just like those early exchanges. This chapter isn't about the weight of owing. It's about the warmth of giving. Now imagine someone in that ancient group falling ill. Perhaps they couldn't hunt or gather for several days. The others would naturally bring them food, check on them, keep the fire burning for them. They wouldn't say, "You owe me." They wouldn't expect repayment in any direct way. They simply helped, because someday they knew they might need help too. And when that day eventually came, the circle would turn again. This was the first loop, the first cycle, the first soft pattern of human debt. It wasn't mathematical. It was emotional, but not in a heavy way. It was safe, predictable, and comforting. It made life easier. It strengthened communities. It helped everyone sleep at night knowing they were not alone. Let your shoulders relax a little more. Let the idea settle that the earliest debts were not burdens. They were threads connecting people to each other. Quiet threads, almost invisible, but strong enough to hold entire communities together. Even disagreements back then were handled without the harsh structure we have today. If someone took more than they gave for too long, the group didn't punish them with interest or late fees. Instead, the imbalance simply worked itself out over time. There was always another chance to contribute, another chance to give, another moment to restore harmony. The community itself was the system. Think about how calming that must have been. No pressure, no deadlines, no numbers to calculate late at night. Just a gentle expectation that everyone would do what they could, when they could. This early form of debt wasn't about owing. It was about belonging. So imagine yourself sitting around that ancient fire. The warmth touches your skin. The flames dance softly. You can hear quiet conversation drifting through the night. Someone laughs lightly. Someone shares a piece of cooked meat. Someone else offers help with fixing a tool the next morning. And in this soft exchange, nothing feels heavy. Nothing feels complicated. This is where the story of debt truly begins. Not in fear, not in punishment, not in the cold mathematics of modern finance, but in a peaceful understanding that life is easier when we support each other. Take another breath here. Slow, gentle, easy. Let your mind settle into the simplicity of that world. A world where a promise wasn't a burden. It was simply a way of saying, I'm here for you, and you're here for me. This was the first promise ever owed, not with numbers, not with contracts, but with kindness. And as we move into the next chapters, we'll slowly watch how this simple human connection began to transform into something larger, something more structured, something that still shapes your life today, even in ways you may not notice. But for now, just rest in this moment. Feel the quiet glow of that ancient fire. Feel the softness of community, of shared survival, of gentle giving. Let it calm you. Let it carry you. Chapter 2. Temples, clay tablets, and quiet bookkeepers. Take a slow breath in and let it drift out gently. Let your shoulders soften. Let your mind ease into a quieter space as we move forward in time, leaving the small fires of early human camps and stepping into the first places that began to look like the foundations of civilization. Imagine the world thousands of years later. People have settled into larger villages, and those villages have slowly grown into small towns. Instead of wandering in search of food, people plant crops, raise animals, build homes, and create something that feels stable. With stability comes new needs, new systems, new ways of understanding the flow of life. And at the center of many of these early towns stood something that might surprise you. Not a palace, not a marketplace, but a temple. Temples in ancient Mesopotamia were not just places for worship. They were the calm heart of the community. These buildings were steady, peaceful spaces made of sun-dried brick, their walls warm from the desert sun. Inside, the air was cool and quiet. People didn't gather there just for prayer. They gathered because the temple was the safest place to keep their most important things. These temples held grain, tools, shared goods, and the trust of the entire community. They were the first banks, long before anyone even imagined such a word. Now picture a small room inside one of these temples. The air is still. The only sound is the faint scratch of a stylus pressing into wet clay. This is where the first written debt records were kept, not on paper, not in books, but on small clay tablets that fit easily in a person's hand. The bookkeepers of this world were quiet, patient people. They didn't rush, they didn't stress. Their work was steady and peaceful. A villager might walk in with a small bag of grain and gently place it before the scribe. The scribe would take a tablet, press symbols into it, and record the exchange. Not with numbers the way we use them today, but with markings that showed who gave what and who would receive something later. Imagine how slow and calm that process was. The scribe would shape the clay, smooth it with their fingers, and carefully press the stylus. Every mark created a story, a simple promise captured in a soft, earthy material. These clay tablets would then be set aside to dry in the warm air, becoming firm enough to last years, even centuries. They were the first financial memory devices, and yet they were so simple, so tactile, so human. Let your breath slow a little more as you picture this quiet temple room. Light filters in through small openings in the walls. Dust hangs in the air like tiny golden particles. Outside, you can hear the faint chatter of the market, but inside the temple, everything feels peaceful and steady. Debt during this time was still gentle. Villagers brought grain to the temple after a harvest, and in return, they could borrow food during the months when crops were not ready. Sometimes the temple lent seeds, sometimes tools, sometimes even animals for farming. In these exchanges, there was no sense of fear, no penalty that threatened someone's well-being. It was the same soft promise from early human groups, but now written down so the whole community could remember. If a family borrowed grain in the spring to survive until the harvest, the temple simply trusted that once their crops came in, they would return what they could. And because the records were kept on clay, nothing was lost, nothing was forgotten, and nobody had to keep track of it in their minds. This made life easier, kinder, more predictable. Imagine someone walking into the temple with a small bowl of barley. They hand it to the priest or the scribe. The scribe nods quietly and writes a simple line on a fresh clay tablet. No rush, no frustration, just a steady rhythm of giving and returning. The temple didn't demand repayment on a strict schedule. Life was too unpredictable for that. Crops could fail, weather could change. Illness could affect a family's ability to work. The ancient world understood these things. Debt was part of life, but it was part of life in a soft, adaptable way. As towns grew, these temples became even more important. They protected the community's resources during droughts. They supported families through hard seasons, and they provided a sense of security, knowing that no one had to survive entirely on their own. Imagine the calm of knowing that if you needed help, there was a place where you could go, a place that would support you without judgment, without pressure, without fear, a place where small clay tablets quietly held the memory of every promise made. Let your breathing settle again as we continue to imagine this world. You can almost hear the gentle tapping of the stylus, the soft movement of clay, the low murmur of priests discussing harvests and offerings. Everything moves at a slower pace. Everything feels grounded. In many ways, these early temples were the first financial systems. They created structure. They introduced the idea that communities could work together not only through sharing, but through recorded agreements. But even with these new systems, debt hadn't yet become a burden. It was still rooted in cooperation. It was still part of a larger effort to help one another survive. Over time, the temple walls filled with shelves holding rows and rows of tablets, each one a story, each one a quiet agreement between people who trusted the system and trusted one another. And in this peaceful place, something new began to take shape. The idea that keeping track of promises could help a community grow. That organized giving and receiving could support larger efforts, bigger harvests, stronger families. These ideas would later transform the world, but right now, in this chapter, they are still simple, gentle beginnings. Let your shoulders relax as you imagine walking through one of these ancient storerooms. The shelves are lined with clay tablets, each one slightly different in size and shape. Some are small and round, like smooth stones. Others are rectangular, with soft edges. They feel cool to the touch, surprisingly heavy for their size. Every one represents a moment of trust. Debt was no longer just shared memory. It had become something written, something physical, something the entire community could see and understand. But it still carried the softness of its origins, still connected to survival, kindness, and cooperation. As you rest here, envision the sun beginning to set outside the temple. Light drifts across the ground in long shadows. The day slows down. People make their way home. Inside the temple, the last scribe finishes their work, sets their tablet aside, and gently closes the wooden door to the storage room. Everything becomes quiet again, peaceful, still. And with that stillness, we begin to step forward to the next stage in our journey. Because soon, communities will outgrow simple clay tablets. They will need something new, something easier to carry, something that feels like value itself. But for now, stay here with this image. A calm temple, soft clay tablets drying in warm air. Debt recorded not to burden anyone, but to support everyone. Chapter 3. The Gentle Birth of Money. Take a slow breath in. Let it settle. Let your mind soften as we leave the temple storerooms behind and drift toward one of the most peaceful transformations in human history. A change that would shape the entire future of civilization, yet began in simple, quiet moments. Tonight, we're stepping into the dawn of money, but not the kind you might imagine. Not shiny coins, not crisp bills, and definitely not numbers glowing on a screen. The very first version of money was far humbler. It grew slowly, naturally, almost unintentionally, like a seedling rising through soil without anyone noticing. Imagine the ancient world again, but this time from a different point of view. Villages have grown into bustling towns. Markets are becoming busy, places filled with the soft chatter of people trading goods. Farmers bring baskets of grain, shepherds bring wool and milk, craftsmen bring tools. And in the middle of all this movement, people are still relying on those gentle clay tablets kept safe in temples. But as life becomes more complex, something begins to happen. The old system of promises recorded on clay starts to feel too slow, too heavy, too tied to the temple. People want something they can carry with them, something that represents a promise without requiring a priest or a written record. So traders begin using objects to stand in for value, not coins yet, but simple things like bits of silver shaped into soft, irregular pieces. These pieces were not money in the way we think of money. They did not have numbers stamped on them. They were simply objects that everyone agreed held value. A quiet agreement, a shared understanding. Picture a morning in an ancient marketplace. The sun rises slowly. The air smells of warm bread and fresh grain. A farmer kneels beside a basket of barley. A potter sets out clay bowls. A shepherd walks with a small pouch tied to his belt. Inside that pouch are pieces of silver, nearly weightless in his hand. When he wants to buy a bowl from the potter, he does not borrow grain from the temple and repay it weeks later. He simply reaches into his pouch and offers a small piece of silver. The potter weighs it in his palm. He nods. The exchange is done. This tiny action, so simple and calm, becomes one of the earliest forms of money. Take a moment here. Let your breath settle. Feel how smooth and quiet that trade is. No tablet, no record, no scribe, just a peaceful understanding. Of course, these bits of silver did not look like the coins we have today. They had no perfect shape, no markings. Each one looked slightly different. But people trusted the weight, the shine, the feel of them. These pieces were widely accepted because the temples themselves used silver for offerings and repayment. So even though money was slowly becoming separate from temples, the comfort people felt toward the old systems helped them trust the new ones. Imagine holding one of those little pieces in your hand. It is cool. It reflects light softly. It feels important, but not intimidating. You know that if you want to buy food, tools, or cloth, this little piece can help you do that. And in this way, debt begins to transform. Instead of borrowing goods directly, people borrow silver. And repaying someone in silver is easier than repaying them in sheep, or bowls, or grain. Value becomes lighter, easier to carry, easier to exchange. Let your shoulders relax as we picture this gentle transition. Money is born not out of greed or power, but out of convenience, out of calm, practical needs, out of the desire to make life easier, not harder. Traders traveling long distances especially loved this new idea. Carrying bags of grain across miles of rough land was exhausting, but carrying a handful of silver pieces allowed them to move freely, to rest when they needed, to travel lightly. Traders might stop at a small village along the way and exchange silver for food or fresh water. The villagers, in turn, could use the same silver to buy tools from someone else. Money created new connections between communities, quiet ones born from trust and ease. Imagine the sound of those early marketplaces. Low voices, bare feet walking over packed earth, the occasional soft clink of silver pieces touching one another inside a pouch. Everything slow, everything gentle. The people of this time did not suddenly wake up one day and declare, "We have created currency." Instead, money slipped into life gradually, blending into daily routines the way dawn blends into daylight. No moment was dramatic. It was a soft shift, the kind that only becomes obvious when you look back from centuries later. And this new form of value made debt even more flexible. Instead of owing specific goods, people now owed silver. Instead of borrowing grain, they borrowed money that could be used in many different ways. Instead of waiting for the next harvest to pay back a loan, they could repay someone with silver they earned through any kind of work. Debt was becoming more fluid, more adaptable, more personal. But even now, it was still rooted in trust. If someone borrowed silver for seeds, for repairs, or for food, it was understood that repayment would come when possible. Communities still held on to the old values of kindness and cooperation. Money had not yet become a tool for pressure or punishment. It was simply a symbol, a peaceful stand-in for promises. Picture a quiet evening in one of these early towns. A family sits together inside their home. They count a small handful of silver pieces on a woven mat. They speak in soft voices, planning what they might buy at the market tomorrow. Maybe a warm cloak, maybe new pottery, maybe extra grain for the coming winter. The children watch with curiosity, not because money feels powerful, but because it feels new and interesting. Outside, the moon rises. The streets grow quiet. People settle into sleep knowing that the new system of money makes life a little smoother, a little easier, a little more predictable. Let your breath slow again as you imagine this peaceful world. A world where money does not control people. It simply helps them live. It helps them trade. It helps them support each other in a more organized way. As time moves forward, money will continue to evolve. It will become more structured. It will become more standardized. And eventually, it will become a symbol of power as much as a symbol of value. But in this chapter, here in these early years, money is gentle. It is a helpful idea, quietly taking shape in the hands of ordinary people. Take a soft breath. Let it drift out. Notice how even a concept as big as money has a calm and humble beginning. Just a small piece of silver. Just a shared agreement. Just a simple way to make life easier. And soon, this new idea will spread from traders and farmers to entire villages. But first, it will pass through one of the most important places in human history, a place where debt and money take on new meaning. Chapter 4. The village that invented credit without even knowing. Take a slow breath in and let it drift out gently. Now settle back, close your eyes if you haven't already, and let this quiet little story get a bit softer around the edges, like candlelight in a peaceful room. Tonight, we're traveling to a village that never appeared on any grand map. A village so ordinary that most travelers pass by without ever knowing it, held a small secret about money. Not the kind of secret that hides gold or precious stones, but something far simpler, and far more human. Picture a small valley, tucked between rolling hills that always smelled faintly of warm soil and early morning dew. A place where people woke before the sun rose, not because they wanted to, but because life asked it of them. Chickens needed feeding, wheat needed cutting, and the day would not wait politely for anyone. The village was quiet, friendly, and surprisingly smart in ways that had nothing to do with books or grand theories. It was smart in the way people are when they learn by living. There was no bank here. No coins stacked in shining piles. No written contracts with complicated words. Yet somehow, without ever naming it, this little village slowly invented its own kind of credit. A gentle, human kind of credit that grew naturally out of trust, memory, and the soft understanding that everyone needs help sometimes. If you walked into the village square, you would hear it in the way people talked. Someone might say, "I'll bring you the apples after the harvest," or "You can take the flour now and settle it when your sheep are shorn." No one wrote anything down. No one charged interest. No one worried about exact timing. It was simply understood, like breathing, like seasons, like rain that comes when it comes. The baker, a quiet man named Rulon, became the unintentional keeper of this system, not because he wanted power, but because he had something everyone needed. Bread was life here. Warm, soft, comforting bread that carried the smell of calm mornings and steady hands. Some days, a villager might not have the coins to pay, and Rulon would nod gently, telling them not to worry, that they could settle when their potatoes or wool or firewood were ready. He never asked twice. He never kept a list. He simply remembered. And the beautiful thing was that everyone else remembered too. People wanted to stay in balance, even if the balance existed only in their minds. When the autumn wind began to blow and the fields turned a gentle gold, baskets of produce would quietly appear at Rulon's door. Carrots, onions, bundles of herbs, sometimes jars of honey. It wasn't payment really, it was gratitude. No one in the village thought of it as a system. They were just helping each other stay afloat. But unknowingly, they had created a perfect cycle. A cycle where goods moved long before money did. A cycle where trust was the currency. If you stayed long enough, you could see how deep that trust ran. When a young couple named Lyra and Tom got married, they didn't own much. Their small home had a roof that whistled in the wind and a floor that creaked even when no one walked across it. They were nervous, as newlyweds often are, but the village took care of them in a quiet, gentle way. Someone left a basket of blankets. Someone else brought a small goat. Another offered lumber to fix the door. No one asked for anything in return. People simply knew that someday, somehow, the kindness would come back around. Not to the same people, not in the same way, and not on a schedule, but it would return, like warm seasons returning after winter. This was credit without money, credit without pressure, credit without fear. And as peaceful as it sounds, it worked, year after year, generation after generation. The villagers lived within a web of soft obligations that felt more comforting than restricting. They didn't need official records because everyone lived close enough to see each other's lives. They saw the work people put in. They saw the struggles. They saw the good moments and the bad. Debt here never felt heavy. It felt like shared life. When winter came by surprise one year, sharp and early, the village faced a difficult stretch. Snow fell thick before the harvest was gathered. Food was tight. People worried quietly, but only for a moment. Within days, everyone began sharing what they had. A little flour from one family, a pot of stew from another. Firewood split and delivered to doorsteps. During that winter, no one went cold, no one went hungry. Their invisible system of trust held steady even against the frost. Later, when travelers passed through the village and asked how they managed to get through hard times with no bank, no formal trading house, not even a single ledger, the villagers would simply smile and shrug. They didn't think of themselves as doing anything special. This was just life to them. This was how community worked. In a calm, unhurried way, they had created something powerful, a financial structure built entirely on kindness, patience, and a shared understanding that everyone's turn to struggle would come eventually. Their small acts formed the earliest shape of credit long before the word existed in their language. And maybe the most gentle insight of all is that every society, no matter how far back we travel, seemed to find its own version of this. Humans have always leaned toward cooperation when survival was at stake. And this village, with its quiet habits and warm bread and generous winters, became a tiny reminder that credit started not as business, but as care. And with that, let your breath soften just a little. Imagine the crackling of a small fire, or the distant sound of a mill turning at the edge of the valley. Let the village stay with you for a moment longer, its simplicity resting lightly in your thoughts. Whenever you're ready, you can let the image fade, knowing this gentle place formed one of the earliest blueprints of the world we live in now. Chapter 5. When kings borrowed sleep from their people. Take a slow breath and let it drift out like a quiet sigh. Settle in, close your eyes a little heavier this time, and let this next story wrap around you gently, like a soft blanket warming your shoulders. Tonight, we're stepping into a chapter of history that sounds dramatic at first, but don't worry. We're going to visit it in the calmest, slowest way possible. A way that keeps your mind soft and comfortable, while the world of long ago fades into a dreamy haze. This is the story of how kings, without ever saying the words, borrowed sleep from the people they ruled. Not in a cruel way, not in a loud way, but in a slow, subtle way that shaped entire kingdoms. Imagine an old castle resting at the top of a hill. The stones are weathered, the torches flicker, and the halls grow quiet as the evening settles. A king sits awake long after midnight, thinking about wars that might come, harvests that might fail, or roads that need repairing. He wears a crown, yes, but he also wears worry. Heavy, thick worry that keeps him awake night after night. Now, in the world we live in today, worry usually stays in one person's mind. But hundreds of years ago, when a king worried, an entire kingdom felt it. His sleepless nights created decisions that touched the lives of thousands. And those decisions, even the gentle ones, shifted a little bit of rest from those below him. Kings didn't borrow sleep by taking it. They borrowed sleep by needing reassurance, effort, money, and labor from the people. And the people, quietly, gave up pieces of their peace to support the crown. Let's walk slowly into an example. In a small kingdom by the edge of a wide river, there lived a ruler named King Harwin. He wasn't cruel, not even close. He was thoughtful, almost too thoughtful. He worried about storms, about trade routes, about keeping his people safe. He wanted everything to be perfect, something no world has ever offered any ruler. Late at night, when the castle should have been silent, Harwin paced the stone floors. His advisors slept. His guards fought yawns in their helmets. But Harwin's mind refused to rest. He feared that the river would flood in spring. He feared that fishermen would lose their boats. He feared that the winter granaries were not full enough. So, because he could not sleep, he made decisions. He asked villagers to bring extra grain. He asked craftsmen to work longer hours. He instructed builders to reinforce the riverbanks. He didn't mean harm. He simply wanted safety. He wanted calm. And yet, in doing so, he borrowed a little sliver of rest from each person who listened to his orders. The blacksmith hammered his iron well past dusk, his arms heavy as night crept in. Farmers woke before dawn to gather more grain than they had planned. Fishermen repaired nets by candlelight, blinking against the smoke as their families drifted into dreams without them. No one complained. They believed their king was doing what he thought was right. They trusted him. They were loyal. But as Harwin's sleepless nights continued, so did theirs. And you might think that sounds sad, but here's the gentle truth. People also shared something beautiful in return. They found comfort in helping each other through hard seasons. When the king worried, the community worked together, not out of fear, but out of a shared desire to protect the life they knew. In fact, some villagers said that helping the king helped them sleep better later, because they felt prepared. They felt connected. They felt like part of something larger than themselves. It softened the burden. This pattern didn't just happen in Harwin's quiet kingdom. It happened everywhere. In Egypt, when pharaohs planned grand harvest cycles, farmers worked a little longer to ensure the fields were perfect. In China, emperors studying the stars for omens asked astronomers to stay awake through cold nights. In medieval Europe, kings preparing for winters requested extra hands to secure the forests and roads. And through all these little moments, rulers borrowed small bits of rest from their people, not because they wanted control, but because they carried the worries of thousands on their shoulders, and their sleepless minds created ripples through the towns and villages below. But here is the part I want you to sink into, the part that feels calm and warm and safe. Even though the people gave their time, their energy, and sometimes their sleep, the kings gave something back too. When the river finally rose in Harwin's kingdom, the reinforced banks held steady. Homes stayed dry, food stayed safe, and as the villagers watched the waters swell without destroying anything in their path, they felt relief wash over them like gentle rain. In that moment, no one felt tired. No one felt taken advantage of. They felt proud. They felt connected. They felt like they had built something together. The king's worry had been heavy, but it had guided them well, and the people understood, in their quiet everyday way, that sleep is sometimes shared, just like food, like tools, like stories. A kingdom's rest was something everyone contributed to, and everyone benefited from. You can imagine people sitting around warm hearths that winter, telling each other that all the extra work had been worth it. The blacksmith slept deeply, knowing his iron reinforcements saved the grain stores. Fishermen rested easily, knowing their nets were strong. Farmers settled into bed earlier on cold nights, their hearts a little lighter because the kingdom was safe. Harwin, for the first time in months, slept too. His mind finally let go when he saw his people safe and smiling. And maybe, without ever realizing it, he returned all the borrowed sleep back to them in the form of a peaceful winter. This is how it often worked long ago. Kings carried the worries. People carried the effort. And when the season passed safely, everyone carried the relief. There was a rhythm to it, a soft, human rhythm that moved through villages and castles quietly. If you listen closely, you can almost hear it now, like a gentle heartbeat from a world long gone. And as you breathe slowly, maybe you can imagine that sense of shared calm, the feeling that comes when people work through something difficult together, and then finally, get to rest. Let that feeling settle into your mind. Let it soften your thoughts. Let it loosen anything that feels tight. Just like the people in Harwin's kingdom, you've done enough for today. You've given enough. You've carried enough. And now, this is your season to rest. Let your breath fall into a comfortable rhythm. Let your shoulders relax just a little more. Imagine the warm glow of lanterns fading softly in a castle corridor as everyone, king and villagers alike, drifts into the gentle peace of sleep. Chapter 6. Debt, Empires, and the quiet power behind it all. Take a long, slow breath and let it ease out of you gently, like warm air drifting from a quiet window. Settle your body a little deeper into wherever you're resting. Let your eyes grow just a little heavier. Tonight's chapter moves through history in the softest way, like walking through an old library where every shelf holds stories whispered rather than spoken. We're stepping into a world of empires now, but not in the loud, clashing way you might expect. There will be no roaring armies or thundering horses. Tonight, we're looking at the secret gentle force that shaped kingdoms behind the scenes. A force so subtle that most people never even realized it existed. That force was debt. Not the kind of debt that keeps modern people awake at night. Not credit cards or bank loans or overdue notices. No. This kind of debt was older, slower, almost sleepy in its own way. It moved quietly, like a shadow following the path of history, guiding empires without ever calling attention to itself. Imagine an ancient empire stretching across wide fields and winding rivers, a place where stone roads glimmered in the sun and merchants traveled between cities carrying silks, spices, and stories. What kept an empire like this running wasn't just armies or rulers. It was promise, trust, the simple belief that something given today would return someday in some form. Debt, in its earliest shape, was nothing more than a promise, a whispered understanding between two people or two groups. But when empires grew larger than anyone could walk in a day, these promises began shaping the entire world. Let's imagine one of these empires together. Picture a grand marketplace at the center of a bustling city. The air is warm, and the scent of bread and spices moves through the air like a soft breeze. Merchants talk gently with their customers. Some have coins, many do not. And yet, trade continues because everyone understands something unspoken. If someone needs a pot today and cannot pay, they will bring wheat after harvest. If someone must travel far and borrow a horse, they will return with goods in a month or two. These tiny, everyday promises created a web of trust so large that the empire could breathe steadily from one season to the next. But here is where things turn quietly fascinating. The rulers eventually realized something important. They noticed that controlling these promises meant controlling the flow of life itself. And so, without loud announcements or heavy hands, they started shaping the system around it. They created tokens and coins. They built early record rooms. They wrote on clay tablets and rolled scrolls, all to keep track of who owed what and when. Not because they wanted to punish anyone, but because they wanted to make the empire feel stable, predictable, safe. a place where life could move forward with gentle order. In this way, debt became a quiet power. It was like an invisible thread weaving through the markets, the farms, the temples, and even the palace. A thread that connected people who had never met, binding them not with force, but with mutual need. The farmers needed grain for planting. The merchants needed goods to sell. The rulers needed steady taxes. The soldiers needed supplies. And the entire system rested on the belief that people would keep their promises. One of the softest examples of this power lived in a small village on the edge of one empire. There was an elderly man named Saran who made clay jars. His hands shook sometimes, but he still shaped every pot with gentle care. Many families came to him for jars even when they could not pay right away. Saran simply nodded, smiled, and told them to bring what they could when the time felt right. Over the years, Saran earned something more valuable than coins. He earned trust, and when drought hit the region, when water grew scarce and fields cracked under the sun, the village remembered him. People brought him water first, food first, firewood first. They protected him because, in a quiet way, he had protected them. This is what debt looked like in its earliest and most human form. It wasn't chains or fear. It was connection. It was memory. It was care. Empires, with all their size and structure, simply scaled this idea up. They built systems around it, wrote rules for it, and used it to steady their expanding world. But at its heart, it remained something very soft, something shared, something that lived inside the relationships between ordinary people. Of course, not every ruler treated debt gently. Some used it to gather more wealth or strengthen their control. But even then, the real power still came from the people who agreed to participate. Without their cooperation, without their willingness to believe in the promise of return, the entire empire would have lost its foundation. Debt was the quiet engine humming behind the scenes. Empires rose because people trusted the system. Empires survived because promises were kept. Empires fell when those promises broke. And yet, even in collapse, the idea remained. People never stopped creating simple agreements with one another. They never stopped helping each other through hard seasons. They never stopped believing that something given today might return tomorrow. When you think about it that way, debt becomes something calm, almost comforting. It is a reminder that humans have always found ways to support each other, sometimes through money, but more often through time, effort, kindness, and patience. And if you let that thought sink in, it brings a soft warmth, a reminder that the systems we live under today grew slowly from human hands and human hearts, not perfect, not flawless, but deeply connected to the need to rely on one another. Take a slow breath again, in through your nose and out through your mouth. Let the idea settle in your mind like settled dust in an old sunlit library, gentle, peaceful, unhurried. Debt, in its ancient form, wasn't loud or frightening. It was simply a promise passed from one person to the next, tying communities together like threads in a vast, quiet tapestry. And even the grandest empires, with their towering walls and endless roads, were held together by these humble threads. Threads woven by farmers, merchants, potters, builders, soldiers, scribes, and ordinary families who never knew how powerful their promises truly were. As you drift deeper into this story, imagine yourself walking through that old marketplace again. The gentle voices, the warm sunlight, the soft exchange of goods, the small nods of understanding. A world running not on force, but on trust. Let that bring you calm. Let it bring you ease. Let it remind you that every great system begins with simple human kindness. And as your breathing slows, imagine the whole empire settling into a quiet evening. Lanterns glowing softly, families finishing their meals, merchants covering their stalls, the air cooling gently as the moon rises. In this peaceful moment, the quiet power behind everything rests too. Debt sleeps, empires sleep, and maybe, as you listen, you can feel a little of that peace settling into you as well. Whenever you're ready, you can let this chapter fade slowly into the background, like a faraway melody drifting out of hearing. Let your mind relax. Let your thoughts loosen. Let your body grow heavy in the best, most restful way. You have done enough. You have learned enough. You can let go for now. Chapter 7. The medieval debt that shaped modern life. Take a slow inhale and let it drift out in the softest way, like warm air fading from a candle flame. Let your shoulders fall. Let your eyes grow a little heavier. Tonight's chapter carries us into medieval times, but we're going to walk there gently, almost as if we're floating through that world rather than stepping into it. This is the story of how medieval debt quietly shaped the world you live in today, not through battles or kings or grand speeches, but through calm agreements, simple exchanges, and everyday people trying to make life a little more stable for themselves and their neighbors. So close your eyes, settle in, and let's drift back together. Imagine a medieval town at dusk. The sky is a soft blue-grey, the kind that feels like it's humming a lullaby. Wooden houses line narrow streets. Lanterns glow in warm yellow circles. You can hear the faint clatter of shop doors closing and the gentle chatter of neighbors saying goodnight. Life here moved slowly, like a river that had forgotten it could rush. And in the quiet corners of this old town, debt took a shape that would eventually ripple all the way into modern times. Not harsh debt, not frightening debt, just simple exchanges of trust. If you walk with me past the town well, you'll notice something the villagers hardly think about. When someone borrows grain for winter, they don't repay it with grain. They repay it with bread made from the next harvest. When a blacksmith sharpens a farmer's tools, the farmer might repay him later with wool or fresh vegetables. When a family struggles after a sickness, neighbors give what they can, knowing that someday, in some way, the kindness will circle back. This gentle network of helping and repaying wasn't written down. It wasn't enforced. It lived in memories, in conversations, and in the quiet understanding that everyone owed something to someone, and everyone was owed something by someone else. It wasn't about keeping score. It was about keeping balance. And though no one realized it at the time, this soft system of shared obligation became the blueprint for something far bigger. One of the most peaceful examples comes from the town's Brewers Guild. The guild wasn't fancy, just a group of neighbors who made ale for festivals, feasts, and harvest seasons. But since brewing required ingredients that didn't grow year-round, the guild relied heavily on trust. Farmers provided barley in spring. Herders offered honey in summer. Gardeners brought herbs from their autumn harvests. In return, the guild provided ale for community events and ensured everyone had enough drink during winter celebrations. They didn't call this debt. They simply called it helping. But over time, people realized they needed a way to keep these exchanges organized. So small wooden tokens were created. Nothing special, just carved pieces of wood with symbols on them. A barley mark, a honey mark, a herb mark. You could earn one by contributing something, and you could spend one when you needed something. Simple tokens, simple trust. But they became the ancestors of what we now call currency. It happened so quietly that no one noticed. But the tokens brought something new with them. For the first time, people could store the value of their work, not just trade it immediately. A farmer who helped the guild in summer could be repaid in winter. A herder could earn tokens during one season and use them in another. This created a sense of stability, a sense of time stretching forward in a way it never had before. Life became just a little more predictable, just a little less fragile, just a little more hopeful. And that tiny shift, that gentle, almost invisible shift, became a foundation for modern systems of money, loans, credit, and even banking. There is something soothing about knowing that the systems we use today began in calm little towns like this, not in palaces, not in battlefields, but in everyday lives, in bakers who lent bread, in carpenters who repaired roofs before payment, in neighbors who shared their firewood, in guild members who carved tiny wooden tokens by lantern light. Debt, in medieval times, wasn't a weight. It was a connection, a sign that someone trusted you, a sign that someone believed you would keep your word. And that belief stitched communities together as tightly as the seams on the winter coats they wore. Let's walk a little further now into the town square. The day has ended, and families gather near fireplaces. The warm smell of soup drifts through open windows. Children chase each other in soft circles. The night feels peaceful, like the whole town is exhaling. Here in the square, a scribe named Emlyn sits with a small ledger she keeps mostly for her own curiosity. She writes down the stories of the town, but she also notes who helped whom and how those debts were repaid. Not to enforce anything, but to observe how beautifully intertwined life had become. She notices patterns long before anyone else does. She sees that people are more generous when they feel secure. She sees that trust grows slowly, but once it roots, it becomes stronger than stone. She sees that the town's stability isn't built on walls or guards, but on hundreds of quiet promises kept over many seasons. And she realizes the truth long before history books ever did. Debt wasn't created to punish people. Debt was created to help people live. It was a tool of balance, a bridge of cooperation, a soft thread pulling communities together. Modern life often forgets this, but medieval life remembered it dearly. Let that idea settle into you for a moment. Let it warm your thoughts like a gentle fire. The systems we rely on today grew out of kindness and cooperation, long before they became numbers and rules. They were human first. They were soft first. They were built on trust before they were built on paper. And as the medieval town slowly fades from your imagination, you can let that feeling fade with it. A feeling of being connected to something ancient, gentle, and deeply human. Take a slow breath and let it out. Allow the lanterns of the town to dim. Allow the night to settle over the rooftops. Allow your mind to soften as the quiet streets return to silence. You're learning gently and calmly, just like the villagers did. And just like them, you're allowed to rest now. You're allowed to let go. You're allowed to drift into softness. Whenever you're ready, let this chapter float away like a quiet melody. Your body can grow heavier. Your thoughts can slow down. And you can let your night move peacefully towards sleep. Chapter 8. The debt loop that never truly ended. All right, settle in again. Let your shoulders fall a little heavier, your breath a little softer, and just let this chapter drift around you like a warm night breeze. Tonight, in this final chapter, we wander into a strangely familiar place. A place that isn't ancient, and yet it is built on the same old patterns you've been hearing so about throughout this story. Because the truth is simple. The debt that began centuries ago never really disappeared. It only changed its clothes, put on new names, and quietly slipped into the modern world. And that's where we begin. Picture a calm street at night. Not loud, not bright, just a sleeping city with distant lights flickering like tired stars. Behind those windows, behind those quiet rooms, there are people carrying worries their ancestors once carried too. Not because of war or famine or kings, but because of something softer, invisibly threaded into daily life. Debt. Not dramatic, not chaotic, just present. Always waiting somewhere in the background, like a gentle hum. Let your breathing slow just a little as we explore how this old echo survived. In the medieval world, debt was a face-to-face promise, a handshake, a neighbor leaning over a wooden fence offering help with a smile, a farmer whispering, "I'll pay you back after the harvest." And the village understood because everyone depended on everyone else. But as time moved on, something shifted. Debt became less personal and more structural. Less about borrowing a sack of grain and more about borrowing entire futures. People didn't notice at first, not because they weren't paying attention, but because it all happened slowly, like morning fog lifting unnoticed. Governments borrowed, merchants borrowed, whole empires borrowed, and eventually everyday families borrowed too, not because they were reckless, but because borrowing quietly became part of living. A home, a cart, a farm animal, tools for work, seeds for planting. Each generation told itself the same thing. It's just for now, just until things get better. And maybe that sounds familiar to you too. You can take a slow breath here. Let the air move gently in and gently out. Because the story of debt is really the story of human hope. We borrow when we believe tomorrow will be kinder than today. When we trust that we will find our way forward. Empires once borrowed entire armies, convinced victory would repay everything. Some did, some didn't. But the pattern endured. In the quiet corners of Europe, kings borrowed silver from merchants. In the ports of Asia, traders borrowed spices to sell across oceans. In the deserts of Africa, caravans borrowed camels and cloth, knowing the journey would return far more than it cost. And every time, the same loop formed. Borrow, repay, borrow again. Not because people were trapped, but because systems grow around the things we rely on. Eventually, entire nations were built on this soft rhythm. Taxes paid past promises. Future labor supported present needs. And the loop quietly tightened into a cycle. Not a harmful one. Not an angry one. Just a predictable one. A loop woven into the background of civilization. As cities grew taller and streets filled with new inventions, debt simply adapted. Coins turned into paper. Paper turned into digital numbers. And those numbers turned into expectations, agreements, and plans. Today, the loop is still here. Not as a threat, not as a burden, but as a reminder of the strange, gentle truth. Humans have always leaned on tomorrow to make sense of today. And maybe that's okay, because behind every loan, every promise, every contract, there is a belief that life will continue, that there will be another season, another harvest, another sunrise. Debt is not a story of failure. It is a story of continuity. You can relax a bit more. Let your eyes soften if they're still open. Let your breathing slow just a touch, because the loop that never truly ended also never truly harmed the human spirit. People adapted, communities adjusted, and societies learned to balance between what they had and what they hoped for. The medieval farmer borrowing seed so he could plant before the rains came isn't so different from a modern family taking a loan to build a future. Both are reaching forward with quiet confidence. And maybe, if you think about it gently, debt is less about owing and more about trusting. Trusting a system, trusting a community, trusting time. Every civilization that survived learned how to turn borrowing into stability instead of chaos. They created rules, safeguards, traditions, and rituals. They learned from mistakes. They adjusted when cycles became too heavy. And always they moved forward, even when it felt uncertain, even when it felt overwhelming. The loop simply continued, softly, patiently, predictably. As you listen, you might picture a long, winding path stretching behind us and ahead of us. Ancient footprints on one side, future footsteps awaiting on the other. We walk that path gently, carrying small pieces of yesterday and tomorrow. Not as a burden, but as a companion. Debt, in its truest form, is just one of those companions. Quiet, enduring, a reminder that humans have always relied on one another. Now let your hands rest a little softer. Let your mind drift where it wants. Because the story is almost ending, and endings are meant to feel light, peaceful, and warm. The dead loop might never truly end, but the worries tied to it don't need to follow you tonight. Not here. Not now. Right now you are safe. You are calm. You are listening to a story that has traveled centuries just to reach your ears. And you can let it settle, like dust floating slowly through sunlight. Take another slow breath whenever you're ready. As this chapter closes, imagine the world as a quiet, connected tapestry. Threads crossing, looping, tying together centuries of human effort. Not tangled, just woven. And somewhere in that gentle weave, we find ourselves, living in a world shaped by promises made long ago, but free to dream about the promises we will make tomorrow. The loop continues, yes, but it continues softly, just like you're breathing now. Nothing rushed, nothing urgent, just the steady rhythm of life moving forward. And with that, we drift toward the end of this journey, leaving behind the weight of centuries and carrying only the calm understanding that everything, including us, finds its balance over time. Whenever you're ready, you can let your thoughts blur, soften, and slowly drift outward, because the chapter is complete now, and you deserve to rest. Chapter 9. What ancient wisdom can teach us today. Settle in again. Let the air around you feel a little softer. Maybe your bed feels a bit warmer, and your breath moves just a little slower. This final chapter is gentle, simple, and comforting, because tonight we step back from the long, winding story of debt and history, and we look at the one thing people across centuries silently passed down to us. Wisdom. Not the loud kind. Not the kind written in grand books or shouted in busy markets. but the quiet kind. The kind that lives in small choices, small traditions, and small understandings about how to move through life calmly, patiently, and thoughtfully. So, just breathe slowly. And let me take you through the soft lessons ancient people left behind. Long before modern finance existed, before banks or institutions or digital screens, people understood something essential. Life was easier when lived together. Villages helped one another without hesitation. If one family had no grain, another shared. If someone needed a hand with their roof, neighbors lifted the beams together. It didn't matter whose turn it was or who owed whom, because helping was simply natural. And maybe that's the first piece of ancient wisdom the world quietly forgot. We were never meant to handle everything alone. You can let that thought settle for a moment. Imagine a small medieval village at sunset. People winding down after a long day, gathering around a small fire, talking softly, sharing food, sharing laughter, sharing simple warmth. There were debts, yes, but there was also trust. A belief that no matter how things turned, the community would hold together. Today, even though life feels faster, more complicated, and sometimes more isolating, that ancient wisdom still matters. Because our lives are still held up by the connections we make. Another old truth is patience. Ancient farmers knew the world moved in seasons. There were days to plant, days to wait, days to harvest, and days to rest. And no one rushed the earth. They trusted the timing of things. Modern life tries to run at a different pace. Everything feels immediate, instant, urgent. But if you look closely, the ancient rhythm is still there. Every project still takes time. Every goal still needs patience. Every dream still grows at its own pace. And maybe that's the second lesson. Good things unfold slowly, just like a story whispered at night. Take a slow breath. Let your body sink a bit deeper into your bed or pillow. Just relax. Another piece of ancient wisdom is simplicity. For most of history, people lived with so little compared to today, and yet they often felt richer in connection, in meaning, in routine. Life wasn't perfect, but it was grounded. Work was physical. Meals were communal. Nights were quiet, and mornings were predictable. There was a calmness in knowing that small things mattered most. A loaf of bread, a warm fire, a shared story. A borrowed tool finally returned. Moments that asked nothing more than presence. And here, in your calm space tonight, that same simplicity can return for a little while. Nothing complicated, nothing heavy, just a quiet story to fall asleep to. Now think about one more truth ancient people understood deeply. Contentment didn't come from having everything. It came from appreciating what was already in their hands. A farmer's pride wasn't in owning vast lands, but in a harvest that fed the family. A merchant's happiness wasn't in endless wealth, but in a safe journey home. A parent felt fulfilled not by luxury, but by seeing children warm and healthy by the hearth. And so maybe the next lesson is gentle but powerful. You don't need a perfect life to feel at peace. You only need a moment, like this one, where you let yourself breathe and simply exist. Take another slow breath. Let your eyes soften if they're still open. Let your thoughts drift like soft clouds. The last piece of ancient wisdom is hope. People in the past lived through challenges we can hardly imagine. Floods, famines, long winters, harsh rulers, uncertain futures. Yet they kept going. not because they were fearless, but because they believed tomorrow held possibilities. Hope is the thread that ties all human history together. Every borrowed seed, every rebuilt home, every journey taken, every promise made. It all began with the belief that life will continue to move forward, and that belief still lives quietly in us. So now, as this chapter slowly begins to settle, you can feel that same hope gently settling in your mind. Not loud, not demanding, just there. A soft reassurance that tomorrow doesn't need to be perfect. It only needs to arrive, and you will meet it with the same calm strength that people before you carried. Ancient wisdom isn't complicated. It's simple, soft, human. We carry it without realizing. When we help someone, when we rest instead of rushing, when we breathe slowly during stress, when we trust time, when we appreciate small joys, and when we choose hope over fear. These are the timeless things. And as you let your body grow heavier and your breath grow softer, you can let all these quiet lessons settle deep inside you like gentle roots. Because tonight, you've traveled through centuries. You've followed the rise of debt, the fall of empires, the mistakes, the recoveries, the hopes, and the patterns. And now, you arrive here, in the soft center of everything. A calm understanding that no matter how the world changes, wisdom continues. It continues in you too. Allow the last traces of this chapter to wash over you like a warm light. Soft, comforting, steady. You've learned what the past had to teach. And now you can drift where your mind wants to go next. Slowly, gently, peacefully. This chapter ends with a quiet reminder. Life has always found a way forward, and so will you, in your own time, in your own rhythm, carrying a little ancient wisdom with you, even as you fall asleep. As we reach the end of tonight's journey, let your breath slow and settle into a gentle rhythm. You've wandered through centuries of stories, through quiet villages and ancient markets, through lessons whispered by people long gone. And now, there is nothing left for you to do. Just rest. Whatever thoughts are still lingering, let them drift to the edges of your mind like fading echoes. You are safe. You are warm. And you've earned this moment of peace. So allow your eyes to grow heavy. Let your body melt softly into the bed beneath you. And if sleep begins to wrap around you, let it. There's no rush, no pressure, only calm. Thank you for spending this time with me tonight. And whenever you're ready, just drift, slowly, quietly, into a deep and restful sleep. Good night.